Okay, let's make a start then. So welcome to Room C, and these are the presentations from Cluster 8 with Rachel, the mentor. So loosely speaking, all of these projects were based around assessment for learning, but we'll let you explain, we'll let you hear a bit more detail obviously from the projects, and Rachel will introduce each of them. But I think we're going to start with Essex ACL. So Rachel, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, well, very, very briefly for me, I don't know about anyone else, but I'm having a great day, really fantastic day today. And I've had a great year working with these 4 organisations and their projects. And I'm just going to say I will miss working with all of you. And I hope that you've enjoyed the process despite my nagging for reports and data and everything else. But thank you so much for all your hard work. So yeah, as Claire said, our overarching title is assessment, but we're going to listen to a wide variety of topics. You're going to hear about 2 different bespoke initial assessments, helping ESOL learners with maths, and getting actionable supportive feedback from your learners too. So without further ado, because we've got about 10 minutes per team.
Yeah, sorry, can I just add there, Rachel?
Yeah.
We've got 4 reports, 4 presentations in this section, so we're probably not going to have time for questions.
Yeah.
So if we have got any time at the end of all 4, then that's how we'll fill the time. But if you've got questions, pop them in chat and we'll make sure they get fielded to the relevant parties afterwards, okay?
Yeah, that's super. Thank you. So I'm going to hand over first of all to Joe and Sonia from ACL Essex. Oh, let's see if everyone put themselves on mute, that'd be fantastic. So Joe and Sonia then, in their project, they had a look at how to create a bespoke initial assessment, which very much gave an opportunity to adapt later on to specialist sectors as sections of their organisation. And yeah, over to Joe and to Sonia. Good luck.
Hi everyone, thank you. I'm Jo Loss and I'm the Learning Technologies Manager at Essex ACL.
Hi everybody, I'm Sonia Dignam. I'm the Curriculum Lead for Maths at Essex ACL.
So just about us, we support adults across the whole of Essex. We've got 9 main centres, work out of lots of different outreach centres. Our ethos is to improve lives through learning. We mainly work with adults over the age of 19, but we do have apprentices under 19 as well. In terms of English and Maths, we deliver it across the whole county from GCSE to pre-entry level. And as an organisation, we also offer a wide range of other qualifications, apprenticeships and creative subjects.
As Claire said earlier, our project was around our initial assessment tool and developing something that we could use initially with all our maths learners within the organisation. Obviously, you know, we'll share the challenges that we identified and the benefits that have come from the project. The benefits have been massive and have now gone across the entire organisation. So it's had a really positive impact on us as an organisation. So, now, where did we start? So the reason that we got involved in the first place is that we realised BKSB as a tool, which is what we were using previously, didn't meet our assessment needs. We felt it'd become far too fluid. It was become very grey. It was very long-winded. You know, there were lots of reasons why it wasn't working for us. We also, like everybody else, had gone into a complete shutdown of our sites due to COVID, and still haven't had any of our mainstream classes come back yet, but we are hoping for them to be back in September. So we needed something that could be used remotely. Last summer, when we first went into a lockdown, we did produce something that we were using, and it allowed us to assess our learners. It was extremely time consuming, both for the tutor and for the learner, and it involved lots of kind of login problems and login queries and things like that. So it became quite stressful for everybody.
So what do we do next? Well, we got some feedback, as Sonia said, about the initial process. I was saying the content was great. It met the needs of our learners. It was really good for assessing their levels, but it took too long for the tutors to mark, too long for the learners to access. Lots of queries coming to our tech support team, to our enrolment team, which would take too long to be answered. Another tutor had used a Microsoft form to gain information about the learners on a different course, so not for an assessment process. So where we're using forms for assignments, we looked at trialling a Microsoft form version. One tutor tried that initially with her group of learners. We got feedback from both of them and made some amendments, things like taking the scoring away from it, the assessment, because where some of the longer questions were self-marked, learners were disappointed perhaps they hadn't got the marks they thought they expected. And then this went back out to a larger group, over 200 learners and about 12 members of staff, and we got feedback from them on the process.
This is our new learner journey. So if a learner goes onto our website and looks for a subject, a course that they want to do, they can choose the venue that they want to attend. So that could be class-based, or it could be online live or online self-study. They can click straight away on how they want to enrol, and it takes them to all the assessment sessions that are available for them to enrol onto. And then our system sends them out an automatic email with the hyperlink in it for their assessment. So it's all done automatically with no staff involved at that particular moment in time. So we've completely taken away that time-consuming element that was in place last summer. Next slide, Jo.
And here's a little video, let's hope it plays, on what you do when you enrol as a learner. So as a learner, the first thing I'm going to do is come to our aclessex.com website, and I'm going to search for my course. So in this instance, I'm searching for a maths course. Once I press enter, it's going to bring up our course list. I can then look and choose the course that I want online or the location, and I'm going to click how to enrol. It then gives me information about my course, where it is, and I'm then going to click how to enrol, and it's going to bring up a list of the assessment sessions that I want to go on to. I'm going to find the date and time that suits me, click select, and then I'm going to sign in so that I can enrol. Once I've done this, I will get an email which will have a link to my online maths assessment. On this page here, it tells me all about the assessment, what I need to do, and there's a contact number and an email address in case I have any queries. I'll then click here, which takes me to the Microsoft form. I've got information to fill in, and then I will just work my way through the form, filling in my personal details. You can see that asterisk questions need to be completed, asking where I want to, my preferred centre, my email address, the class I want to join, information about whether I'm working and why I want to undertake the course, information about computer devices I have at home, and then I get onto my maths questions, and I can start to answer these questions, some of which are multiple choice. Some of them I need to actually type in my answer, and the questions get progressively harder as I work my way through. Once I get to the end of this assessment and I click submit, I'll receive an email thanking me, or a prompt thanking me and saying that my tutor will be in touch shortly to discuss the findings at my interview. So as a learner, the first thing I'm going to do is come. Okay, so what was successful? Some of our big successes. Previously, attendance at our assessment sessions, when we had them face-to-face, so pre-COVID, as well as during the COVID times, we generally had about 55% of those enrolled turn up. That's gone to a massive 96%, because the learners are coming to that interview phone call having already completed the assessments. They've made that commitment already. And retention on courses was already really good, about 90%, but it increased to 95.1%. based on the fact that we knew we were putting learners into the right course. Haven't obviously got data yet about success rates, because this has only really been trialled since February, and then they're just taking their exams for the end of their 18-week block. But the huge difference it's made to our service is that this has been adopted by other curriculum areas. English, ESOL, the creative industry, so that's our qualifications in things like photography and dressmaking, and our counselling at level 2 and 3 have undertaken this process. And currently we're working with other areas such as AAT, hair and beauty, to follow this process. And here's some feedback. What was the feedback? Learners. The process was easy, efficient and straightforward. I would never have said it was something new. I found it all really easy. The tutor was lovely, and I'm happily working through my course now. It all seems straightforward enough, bearing in mind it's all online, so no issues with access. Tutors.
The nice thing about using Microsoft Forms for this is that not only do I have the electronically stored results for each learner, but it also provides a summary so you can identify particularly problematic topics which the majority struggled with and therefore emphasise them during the course.
I think because it's a proper one-to-one, they feel more comfortable discussing any concerns or declaring any additional needs.
Definitely less stressful.
Other staff.
Since moving to the same process as maths, the online initial assessment has made entry to the courses much easier, as it can be completed at any time and any place without the restrictions of a set time to complete.
And that's it from us.
Brilliant, and great video there as well, Joe. Thank you so much for keeping to time as well when you have so much to share. And I think that the way that you introduced the project and your starting point about you know, BKSB not being particularly helpful is going to resonate with so many people.
Thank you both, that was fantastic. So next up we have ELATT, and we have the lovely Evie, Imtiaz and Helen, who are going to be talking about a topic which we've all worried about a little bit this year. It's how to build up those student-learner-teacher relationships with this online learning, and how to get some feedback from them on the courses that's not only informative and actionable, but also supportive. So I'll hand over first to Helen, I think.
Hello, thank you. So I'm Helen Rankin from ELATT, and we're an educational charity based in Hackney, and we work with both adults and alternative provision for sixth formers who mainly have special educational needs. So I'm presenting today with my colleagues from the project, and that's Imtiaz Shafiq and Yvonne Akwaku. So if we are super quick, there may be time for one question, but we'll see. So just a bit of background, I'm going to explain why we chose this project. So the goal of ELATT is for our students to gain confidence, skills, knowledge, and we want them to contribute to their communities and also get support from their communities. Of course, the background to all this is the scramble online last March. 1 week we were all teaching in person, and the next week we were all online. So after Easter and then again September, February, we had new students coming in, and these were people we'd never met in person. And some of these students, they were kind of camera off type students, and a few of the sixth formers actually preferred to communicate only by text as well. So this was quite a challenge, and once we collectively got over the initial shock, we found we didn't quite have the same certainties about what outstanding teaching and learning looks like. So it put pressure on tutors, but the upside was that all the tutors really pulled together to learn. It became clear that open relationships between tutors and students was key. Previously, we had a system of what we called learner voice, and you know, feedback was gathered in a variety of ways, but learner voice was gathered by the manager, typically with the whole class group after an observation. And for our project, we felt that communication directly with the teacher would be more effective and would aid this relationship building. So there were some initial concerns about barriers or discomfort, but we really felt it could be quite a powerful tool, which could also support students' communication skills. So over to you, Imtiaz.
Thanks, Helen. So sorry, can you hear me, guys?
Yeah.
Okay. So as Helen said, we were concerned about gaining feedback, and we wouldn't have really this learner voice. So we were interested in getting effective feedback, which is both practical and useful for the teachers to deliver lessons as well. So once we decided that we needed feedback in lessons, we then had to discuss what kind of feedback we're looking for, whether it be one-to-one or group, or face-to-face or online. And because of the COVID situation, we'd have to go online. Sixth form are online, it's doing blended learning. Some people are online, some people in class, but we decided to go online for all the feedback. And in order to do this, we created, we used Office Forms app as well, because we thought that was the easiest for our students as well to use. Then, as you can see in front of you, these are the questions we came up with. There are two sets. There are some on the left, which is the first form of feedback, the first survey we sent out, and the second one was more directed as well. And we wanted constructive feedback. So what we found is that the open text questions were the best form of feedback. They worked better than the closed text ones as well. As always, there are barriers to getting feedback. A lot of the students would treat it in a perfunctory way. They might not take it very seriously. So we had to really make sure that we didn't make the questions too difficult or too long as well, so they get bored with them. We also had to think about how often we would ask for feedback. Now, because we're trying to make it, the feedback's meant to be for the teacher to use for their lessons. So really it's up to the teacher how often they want to use it, and they know their students the best, and they really need to decide, well, what they want to use it for. Is it for a particular topic or activities in a session or even their delivery? And we find that targeted surveys work the best and for particular lessons. The challenges are in analysing the results as well, because if you leave it too loose as well, it can be quite difficult to analyse them. But again, it's up to each teacher to use the results or the responses to feed into their lessons or plan for their lessons. And we wanted to just make it as flexible as possible for all our teachers. Thank you.
So we had good feedback from the project, which I think Yvonne's going to show you at the end, but the feedback survey actually fitted within a wider observation policy. And this is experimental, but now it's been rolled out, we're keen to get a full evaluation from the tutors and from the project in general this autumn. And in this policy, the tutors, they recorded themselves teaching. They asked for student feedback by using the Forms app. And we gave them the choice. They could use, the first form or the second form. They could also adapt it to their context. So for instance, pre-entry ESOL obviously would struggle with the form that we'd done. So that was changed. Also, tutors could adapt it to their particular context. After they'd done the survey and looked at their video, they would do a reflection. And then the final stages were doing a peer observation and then making everything available for discussion with a manager. We found that it took quite a bit of explaining to get through to people because it was something quite new. Some teachers got it really quickly, others took longer, and we did find that a presentation or a couple of presentations in the email, it wasn't enough. We really had to have a workshop and give it the time for exploration and discussion.
Thank you, Helen. I'm just going to discuss feedback from our tutors and learners and what we learned from this experience. In the past, during the observation cycles, after the managers had finished observing the teachers would go for a couple of minutes while the managers collected feedback from the learners. We found that that way of collecting feedback was not as effective as the methods that we have used in this research project. We also found out that the feedback is best when it comes directly rather than via the manager. During our research, we anticipated some barriers which came into fruition and other unexpected ones. For example, cultural barriers meant that some learners felt uncomfortable about giving feedback. We also found that many learners did not have the critical thinking skills required to assess their own learning. We found that doing the survey on forms made it more flexible. So what did the learners learn from this experience? Let's hear from them and what they thought about giving feedback.
You feel comfortable when you talk, or when I talk to my teacher, because really I feel as a friend more than the teacher, because I learn many of her. So when she asked me to give her feedback, I'm very comfortable, confidence to answer, because I can tell or to say the truth about her without adding anything that's not real.
As you can see, Yusuf's confidence has improved. and he now volunteers as a TA in my conversation class. Let's hear from Sophia.
At the first time, I was feeling like not scared, but I wasn't too much confident to give you feedback because I said maybe it could be something.
I can't hear it.
No, we've just lost the sound.
And that's why I think that giving you some feedback, it means to improve the way you're teaching and to improve as well the way of my learning. Next time, I think I will be more confident with other people to give some feedback, because this means that I pay more attention about what are talking to me, what are saying to me, and it means that maybe I can give my opinion about their job, about their actions.
As you can see, the students have enhanced confidence through this experience. And although this project hasn't been fully rolled out in ELATT, and we've just trialed it, it's still a work in progress. We should get good feedback and good data next year. This type of thing takes time to establish its roots. We really enjoyed doing this project and we all learned a lot, which has improved our teaching methods. And also we developed our relationships with our students. In a year when everyone felt isolated, we felt really surprised, we felt really supported. Whenever we met up, it felt like we were meeting up with friends to discuss something we were all passionate about. That's it.
Yeah, apologies. The cat knocked over the table, so I put myself on mute and I knocked the sound off. So sorry about that.
Not to worry. Thank you so much. Rachel, I don't know if you want to sum up, but we really are very grateful for you even being here when you have 2 Ofsted visits this week in 2 different centres. But oh no, that's Weston, isn't it? Sorry.
Yes, sorry.
We have the audit.
No worries, there's a lot going on.
There is so much. I'm trying to keep up with chat, WhatsApp from the core team,
no worries.
and everything that's going on here. I do apologise.
We are very grateful that any of them turned up, otherwise you'd be just listening to Claire and myself. So yeah, thank you to everybody for turning up. Yeah, that was great. Thank you to all 3 of you for that presentation and a lovely project and great learner videos there. So we're going to stick with ESOL learners, and we're going to go over to Westminster Adult Education Service, who are going to talk to us about the very challenging subject of ESOL learners on maths programs and how to increase motivation and to get them to see the relevance of what they're doing, and just some lovely creative ways they went around it. So I'm going to hand over to Jasval and Ruth. Welcome, over to you.
Hi everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Is that okay? Can everyone see that? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, great. Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Jasval Dhaliwal. I work at Westminster Adult Education Service and I'm head of English and Maths. And Ruth?
Yes, good morning. I'm Ruth Leonard and I teach English and Maths at WAES.
Okay, thanks. So our project was about actively engaging our ESOL learners to stimulate intrinsic motivation so that they were able to understand and realize the relevance of maths in a contextualized and applied sense. And how this project came about was our realization that we have a vast number of our ESOL learners at Westminster Adult Education Service, and there's a significant barrier for when they move from ESOL into into formal accredited qualifications, and functional skills, maths being one of them. So the fact that we identified language demands as being a concern underpinned this project, and that led us to think about what we could do to bridge that gap. And how we went about that was to think about the language demands required to access the content of functional skills mathematics. And then when we looked at what we had on offer in terms of the syllabus from the awarding organizations, we found that there was a significant challenge for these learners, because one was around the context of the examples presented. And so that led us to redesign questions and put a more familiar context to enable our learners to access the content, because they've got good math skills, but the actual application and the context was what we needed to improve. So I'm going to go on to my next slide, and Ruth's going to take over, which is a nice slide because it actually shows what we did in order to meet that challenge.
Yes, good morning. So how do we build confidence for our learners? And really it was all about how to go from having a problem to solve on the left and helping them along the journey to actual problem solving. And you can see there were some ups and downs along the way. And we asked questions like, what are the language needs of our learners? How familiar is this context to them from the maths questions? And what is required in the assessments? So we really tried to work together with these threads in building their confidence to both practicing and consolidating their math skills, particularly to do with problem solving. But we also built some evaluation in there with our resources that we created. So I'll talk a little bit about how we went about this next. So we saw it as a cycle. We had 2 semesters with our learners, with a mixture of in class and then lockdown learning, and then back in class again. So to start with, at the top, we really looked closely at the assessment questions from the sample papers and practice papers from our exam board and other exam boards, to really look at the key language and the type of problem that they would have. So this little slide is in terms of the actual resource creation. We then tried to create meaningful contextualized questions. So that could be, for example, when will the tea, coffee or sugar or coffee filters run out? Or catching a bus in London, how many passengers should be allowed on the bus? And that's obviously been changing in the last few months. Time as well, and DIY. And then we trialed resources, and our classes were mixed entry level 2 and 3 with a little bit of entry 1 as well. And the resources were also repeated in support sessions for some of these learners, which were both online and in person. And then at the bottom of each resource were 3 simple questions. How helpful was this resource? Or how helpful was this activity? And they just had to circle 5 stars. And then, did you learn new words today? Yes, no, please give examples of some new words. And thirdly, do you need more practice with, and then we put the name of the topic that was in there, and then a simple yes, no. And also that the tutor could, discuss with the learner after they'd filled it in as well. And then the resource creator and tutors and the learning support tutor got together to discuss modifications, to discuss what topics to work on next, different scenarios, and for example, one of the learning support tutors suggested, you know, the context of a tea break and the target language. And so then we link that into analysing assessment questions on those sorts of topics. So yes, it was very much a team project, and our resources had entry 2 and entry 3 elements in them. So we might have the same context, but we used double digits for entry 2 and 3-digit division, dividing into 3 digits for entry 3. And it was interesting analysing learners' work and really looking more closely at it. And that sort of takes us on to our next slide. So yes, the contextualization to really, as I said, think about what situations can we create that are meaningful for these learners, that aren't a barrier to them, because we don't want to create an additional barrier. When we looked at the learner answers, little things came out. For example, of and off. There's just an extra F in off, but some maths questions might want a fraction of something, and other maths questions might be similar but want money off. And the learners, just looking at their answers, they've been a bit confused about that little word. So we could build in more activities on those words that could be challenging. And again, looking at the evaluations was helpful. In some cases, they hadn't always filled in as much as we would like on the evaluations, but what we did, every bit helps of the feedback that we had back. And then repeating activities, so not all resources, but some of the resources, we built into it a task repetition. So one resource we had in January, February was about bus drivers. So we had 3 or 4 named bus drivers. So, you know, Dev drives somewhere and then Mel drives somewhere. And so each time the learner is gaining confidence in having a similar task to do, similar type question, but with a different named person. And each time, hopefully, they could become a bit more independent with that. Okay. And yes, this was one of the favourite resources. So really to put it in the context of Westminster, where we work and where the students live. And that really helped them in, you know, because the resources we found online were not based in London. So these were familiar place names to them, and they weren't a barrier to them sort of starting to understand about north, south, east, west, and even northeast, southeast, and so on, which is a new topic at entry 3.
So we got some learner feedback. Interesting, that activity we just presented. It was quite an eye-opener for some of these learners who, for example, learner D, who, you know, reliance on the sat-nav on the phone, and, you know, bringing those parts of London to life and made them think more carefully about the activity. So this was just some feedback related to that activity. And as Ruth's described, the bus examples and some of the other resources which we created, which are in our appendices of our project, really brought the subject matter alive for the learners. And often it was the simple things, you know, around familiarity, which bridged that gap. Our teaching staff involved in the project, they thoroughly enjoyed it. It was great to actually, you know, put some focus on the resource creation, seeing firsthand how learners are reacting, responding, and contributing to the discussion in class as a result of the adapted resources. And, you know, at a time when everyone's pressed for, you know, demands at work, it was really good to actually focus in on something so important and often overlooked, because whilst we focus on exam outcomes, but the journey towards that is ever so important. So it was a wonderful opportunity for us to sort of enrich our delivery and think more carefully about what learners experience, rather than us presenting and doing our lessons as we've normally done. So moving this forward, you know, and developing it further, we want to carry on with our continued focus on language and supporting the language of mathematics. And what we realized is that of our learners who achieve E3, and many people will know this on the call, there's a gap, you know, from E3 to level 1. So that's given us an opportunity to think about some non-accredited provision we could implement as part of our delivery to bridge that gap. So that's in process at present. So and I think, yeah, that brings us to an end.
Thank you so much, Jessbal. Thank you, Ruth. That was great. And as I said in chat there, I think you've got all London providers wanting your worksheets now, so you might get some emails.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. Those problem-solving skills we know are so important. And even though you were focusing on maths, I think there'll be people from other subject areas who can see the translation into their area as well. So thank you.
Brilliant. So I'm going to introduce our last team, and we're kind of like coming full circle, because we started off talking about BKSB initial assessments, and that's kind of a bit of a theme to the start of our next presentation from Weston College and the teams that deliver in the secure state offender learning, who looked at whether or not ESOL learners were being adequately served by the BKSB initial assessment, and whether or not that was something they needed to address and find an alternative. So I'm going to hand over to Richard now. Hi, Richard, welcome. And yeah, and Teresa, I believe, is with us also. Over to you.
Thanks, Rachel. And I'm going to ask Teresa to share her screen to bring up our PowerPoint presentation there. So we can see the first slide there. Welcome to the ESOL Initial Assessment Project. The project took place at HMP Maidstone, which is a foreign national prison. So the prison holds around 600 male prisoners who don't have British passports or paperwork, basically. Next slide, please. So from January to March 2019, we found that around 40% of learners in ESOL classes were being transferred, mostly, to other classes, or a few of them were being withdrawn. And in the context of the short courses that we run at Maidstone, which are around 5 weeks long, any time that we don't use with maximum efficiency does represent some lost learning potential or misdirected learning time. And so we were keen to try and find out what the problem was and to alleviate it if we could. Next slide, please. And so, again, like Rachel said, going back full circle, we felt that there was potentially an issue with the BKSB English assessment that was being used at our education inductions, because it's designed for native speakers rather than for ESOL learners. And we were wondering whether an ESOL, a specific initial assessment for ESOL learners, could yield more nuanced or accurate level results. And so we created an initial assessment that has 3 parts. The first part is an oral pre-screen, which has 5 questions of increasing difficulty. And then learners move on to a writing assessment, and there are 2 levels of that, a pre-entry stroke entry 1, and an entry 2 stroke entry 3. And then finally, there's a reading assessment at all 4 levels from pre-entry to entry 1 for some fine tuning at the end there. Next slide, please. So moving on to the results, between October 2020 and June 2021, a total of 94 learners took the initial assessment writing activity. And this pie chart shows you here that in blue, 54 out of those 94 learners, or 57%, were ESOL learners, and the remaining 43% were functional skills English learners. And this is very significant for us because a foreign national doesn't necessarily mean automatically that they're an ESOL learner. And it's important for us to try and understand what we're dealing with. But if we're saying that approximately at any given time, around 57% of the learners are ESOL learners, then clearly is a very significant part of the learners that we work with, and we need to make sure that we serve them as best as we possibly can. Next slide, please. So focusing on those 54 ESOL learners that we identified through the initial assessment writing, 13 were at pre-entry in blue there on the left-hand side, 10 at entry 1, 17 at entry 2, and 14 at entry 3. I mean, that is interesting enough in itself, but what is just as interesting is what it doesn't tell you. And these initial assessments were generally completed in the learners' cells, basically in their rooms where they've been locked up for sort of 22, 23 hours a day during the pandemic. And what this indicates to us is that actually the results are weighted in favour of the higher level learners at E2 and E3, where they already have the pre-existing language skills to engage with the tasks. And once in recent months, we've been allowed to go around to the prison, including into the wings where the learners live, but also into their workplaces to see them. And what we found is that there are many, many pre-entry learners who really are struggling to engage with what the prison calls the regime or the prison timetable of work and education. And so as a result of finding these learners and being able to interact with them, now that we're going back to face-to-face delivery as of Monday, we've completely changed how we're running the pre-entry courses, so that we're doing a combination of outreach where the learners are and in the classroom to try and reach those learners and help them to access what the prison has to offer. Next slide, please. What we also wanted to do was try and see how good a match for the level the BKSB gives as compared to the ESOL initial assessment. So this is testing really how much more accurate, let's say, the ESOL initial assessment results are as compared to the BKSB, in particular for ESOL learners. So what we found is that in blue, 13 ESOL learners recorded a higher level on the BKSB English as compared to the ESOL, and then 2 ESOL learners recorded a lower result on the BKSB. And the remaining 16 learners, so approximately half of them, got the same level on the BKSB as compared to the ESOL initial assessment writing. So what this says is that although the BKSB gives accurate results approximately half the time for ESOL learners, that's still another half of the learners who potentially could be being allocated to the wrong class. And so this is where the misdirected learning comes from, and that's where the 40% of these learners being transferred or withdrawing comes from. And that's what we want to seek to reduce. So this result suggests to us that there is very much a need for a specific ESOL initial assessment, and that it could potentially lead to more accurate allocations. Next slide, please. So some of the advantages of the ESOL initial assessment writing for us, as opposed to the BKSB English, is that it's very quick to complete. Actually, it takes less time on average than the BKSB English, especially when you consider that learners previously took a free writing activity anyway. The second thing is that, quite simply, it's more difficult for learners to be assisted by what we call a peer mentor or a classroom assistant on a writing task, as it is compared to the BKSB. And the writing actually offers greater insight into the learner's ability, and it allows for more nuance and therefore more accurate levelling. It also removes the element of luck, because on a multiple choice you can just choose at random, and it gives a truer reflection of ability. And so for all those reasons, it also gives a more reliable and informed level assessment. And that's really helpful for the prison's activities department, which is the department allocating learners to our courses. Next slide, please. So just one case study here, learner CR. As a result of the initial assessment, he was placed at entry 2. The y-axis or vertical axis, the numbers don't quite reflect exactly the levels, but it's just indicative really. So he started off at entry 2, and by the time he took exams at entry 2, he was a very sound level there. He moved on to entry 3, working on the packs that we produce for remote learning. And he's about to join a class on Monday. And by the end of that 5-week course, it's predicted that he's going to be at a strong entry 3 level and ready to take those exams and achieve. And hitting entry 3 is very, very important in the prison, because that allows access to a far wider range of work placements and further educational opportunities, such as the vocational opportunities. And so what we're trying to do as part of a rehabilitative culture is to help learners to achieve qualifications and experience that are going to help them when they leave the prison to get a job. And that's part of the rehabilitation. Wherever they're going in the world, whether they're staying here or not, it's really the same aim. Next slide, please. We learned quite a few lessons throughout the course of this project. And I mean, the main thing really is that it works. The writing assessment allows differentiation between functional skills English and ESOL learners, but it also allows differentiation between levels, right from pre-entry through to level 2. The oral pre-screen is essential, but it can take different formats. And so what I mean by that is, yes, there are those 5 questions that can be used, but I mean, as I'm sure all of you guys will know, it's pretty apparent within, say, 10 seconds of meeting someone whether they understand you or can speak English or not. So some kind of oral pre-screen is really helpful there. The reading assessment isn't actually essential in the majority of cases to level assess, but it can be used to clarify level in more complex or tricky cases. And also then going back to the previous presentation, talking about maths learners, it can also be really helpful for those maths learners with ESOL needs, because they do need a certain level of English understanding in order to be able to accurately interpret the questions that they have to be able to grapple with as part of their maths studies. And one thing we also found is that the writing assessment does need to be teacher-led, because there is a degree of nuance involved in level decision making. Next slide, please. A few more things that we learned. One was that the initial assessment process for ESOL actually is shorter than the BKSB process, so that could represent saved time. It also saves time later in the process, because if learners go to the right place first time, then obviously there's no need to then move them, which causes people work, but most importantly causes disruption to the learner journey. The initial assessment can be run by classroom assistants or peer mentors, as we call them, under supervision, and that frees up staff carrying out inductions or assessments to have those one-to-one conversations with learners from which you can glean some really helpful information. And finally then, the ESOL assessment is also useful for functional skills English learners as well, and so there's a potential to deploy it in any establishment with a mix of learners. Next slide, please. So there are a few things that we might like to have known that could have affected or influenced what we would have done. One thing is about the pre-entry learners. There are simply more of them, even more of them than we thought. The oral pre-screen, useful, but can take a different form. The reading assessment, again, used for tricky cases or for ESOL maths learners, and then also it's applicable to functional skills learners. There is a solid match between the BKSB and ESOL initial assessment writing results for functional skills English learners, though. So it shows that both are effective for those learners. Next slide, please. Looking to the future, we're hoping to continue to deploy the ESOL initial assessment writing in education inductions, and to record the pathway of ESOL learners from their inductions into the courses now to further check the validity and reliability of the assessment. We're pretty confident that it is working, but we just want to do those further checks. We were organising some regional training for relevant prisons where for prisons that have a high proportion of ESOL learners, so that they can start using the initial assessment in those establishments. We're going to be attending the first ETF Offender Learning Network meeting, which I believe is early on next month. And then further into the future, we're really hoping that this is something that other prisons can make a use of. And going back to what we found about the proportion of ESOL learners amongst foreign nationals, if you think that there are around 90,000 prisoners in the UK, and at any given time around 10% of those are foreign nationals. So if you transfer the proportions to that figure, then you're looking at well over 5,000 prisoners who have entry-level ESOL needs at any given time in this country. And indeed, some prisons in London, for example, hit 50% of foreign nationals at certain times. So I think there are definitely national implications for this project, and we hope that it can be used effectively for learners elsewhere, not just in prisons, but also in non-custodial environments, such as the colleges that and charities that you guys work for. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much to yourself and Teresa. It's so much of worth there and reflection for all of us, and I'm sorry that we now have to dash off,